Hey everybody, this is Dustin with www.gamblingonfreedom.com. I am a certified hypnotherapist specializing in problem gambling, gambling addiction, compulsive gambling. And in today's video, I really wanted to talk a little bit about what to look out for when you are looking for someone to help you quit gambling. Okay, so as gambling addicts go, I know there's sort of this shame around asking for help. A lot of problem gamblers don't like to. They don't like to ask for help. They believe they can do it all on their own, and that's perfectly fine. And I want you to do it on your own because if you can do it on your own, fantastic. You don't need me necessarily. You don't need somebody like me necessarily, right? So if you can stop on your own, fantastic, do it, right? But if you've tried and you've tried and you've tried and you've tried and you just keep failing and you keep relapsing, then maybe this video will help. So I want you to understand the relapse itself is just information, guys. All right, it's just information. It doesn't have to mean that you've actually failed. Right? It's just information. For one, there's a difference between a relapse and a lapse. All right, a lapse of judgment is you messed up once, right? It's a lapse of judgment, right? Versus a relapse, which is you completely go back into the binge of the addiction, right? Whatever the addiction is. And one really important concept I want you to understand before going further, you need to have 100% commitment towards quitting gambling, and you need to have 0% shame and guilt if you lapse, right? Because what happens is that shame and guilt, and I've talked about it a lot on this channel, is the shame and guilt cycle. So that shame and guilt is what spirals you back down. Okay. So think about it like this, where it's like I have 100% focus and commitment towards quitting gambling, right? And if I don't quit in the time that I've, made a goal for it to quit, if I don't quit in that time, or if I happen to go back and gamble and I give in to my urges, if I go then back into shame and guilt and I beat myself up over it and I feel like I'm a weakling and I feel stupid and, I've broken promises to people and I've hurt my, friends and loved ones and myself and all this stuff and I keep going down, yeah, you're going to probably go back and gamble because all that pain will eventually lead you back to gambling since that is the relief, right? I've talked about this quite a bit in my channel as well. The gambling is an attempted solution. It is not the problem. It's not the problem, guys. It's the attempted solution of whatever the real problem is. Okay. So this is very important because what I really want to dive into is how sort of traditional approaches might not be as effective as they could be or as people are hoping for them to be. Unfortunately, the traditional approach is usually going to be combined with cognitive behavioral therapy. If you've ever done traditional therapy, you've probably had that approach. And if you're still gambling, there's good reason. It's because it's very conscious. It's very surface level. It's very here, right? And I've talked about this before. As a hypnotherapist, I'm much more interested in the subconscious. The conscious, you do need to have a conscious desire to quit, right? That has to be there. You have to want to quit. But if you feel like, yes, I want to quit, and logically I know I should, but I feel like I can't, and you have thinking going this way and feeling, belief, identity, learned experiences, and all the stuff going in this way, right? Then you have a conscious to subconscious conflict and you have a lot of dissonant energy because of it. Okay. So dissonant energy within the nervous system because you think this but feel that. Right. So what happens is if we're using an approach like cognitive behavioral therapy and we keep everything surface level, conscious level, we're not digging into what's actually going on, right? So here's the thing. So one thing to understand about different approaches is it doesn't have to be that everything is childhood trauma. Okay. If you hear someone like me say that, then that might not get you to where you want to be when you're doing this for yourself, when you're quitting gambling. If all they're talking about is, it's because of childhood trauma, or it's because you have anxiety, or it's because you have depression, or it's because of X, Y, and Z. If anybody's really saying that, they probably don't have the experience to just help you. I'm gonna be honest, guys. Like, they don't have the experience, because if they did, they wouldn't be saying those things. It's not that. And I'll give you a perfect example, which is a recent client, came in, and they've been addicted to gambling for the last, like, I think it was 20 years. 20 years, a long time. Addicted to gambling for 20 years. And what happened? Well, what happened was 8 months prior to their gambling addiction, they lost a dog. Their dog died. Their childhood dog that they grew up with, their childhood dog finally died, right? Uh, got the dog when they were like 8 or 9 years old, and they lived with the dog until they were in their early 20s, and then eventually it died, right? And that loss is what they've actually been chasing, right? So that's the loss that they were chasing. It wasn't childhood trauma loss. It wasn't childhood trauma. It was this dog, their friend, their companion, their best friend, the family member, right? They loved this dog. And what happened was, somehow, some way, the subconscious mind was like, this is a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain. And instead of dealing with it, instead of moving on from it and processing the emotions behind it, the emotion started to become a glue, and it started to connect associations from other parts of their life now aren't going well, perhaps. And so all of that gets mixed up into this. And then now all of a sudden they have all this emotional pain that they've been dealing with and holding back and suppressing and not allowing themselves to feel, and all these things for several months. About 8 months is what they said. About 8 months. And then they ended up gambling one night. I don't remember if they said they were at a bachelor's party, but they were doing something. And they had went to a casino, and all of a sudden everything went away. All of the problems in their life, all the responsibilities, all the stuff that they have to worry about on a day-to-day basis just vanishes, right? And so it vanishes, and it vanishes for however long they were gambling that day. And then the next weekend they do the same thing, because now, yes, they've lost some money, but it's not that big of a deal. They knew they were going to probably lose money. The house always wins, right? You guys know this stuff. And so what happens? Well, they don't think anything of it. They go back the next week, and then they don't think anything of it, and they go back the next week, and they keep doing this. And one time turned into 20 years. And over time, the more you lose, the more shame and guilt, right? And the more you win, the more you build the habit. So I've talked about both shame and guilt cycles and habit loops, and how those both create the addiction itself, right? And so, among other things, but that creates the addiction. But they're chasing not the losses from every loss of the gambling, but they're chasing the loss, in this case, from the loss of the dog. So after we healed that, after we processed out the emotion, and they were able to see that far differently, and they were able to come to a conclusion that they can move on from it. After that happened, and after we healed other components of their life that got mixed into that issue, what happened was they bought another dog. They bought another dog, and the urge to gamble completely vanished. Completely. Just no urge at all whatsoever to go gamble. The dog being replaced, and not replaced, but another dog coming into this person's life after healing the old dog's death, and there's some other stuff there. But that was really the key. That was really where I saw the shift happen in the session, because this person didn't even remember how they felt about their dog dying suddenly, right? That their friend, left suddenly. And so I want to bring this up because, traditional approaches, they might say, oh, well, everything is childhood trauma. Everything is childhood trauma, but that's not true. Okay, so it could be childhood trauma. I've worked with clients who have had childhood trauma, and that has been the catalyst for why they are now gambling and gambling addicts, but it doesn't have to be. So I don't want you to buy into this idea that everything is childhood trauma, because it's just simply not true. And honestly, whoever's kind of saying that, uh, you, I don't want to step on anybody's toes here, but you probably don't have the experience that you need in order to say that. Because if you did, you wouldn't be saying that. So, um, my thing is that I hear all the time from clients that, they've seen a psychotherapist or a psychologist for 2 years, 3 years. They go to a counselor for a year or 2 years, and they do both approaches at the same time, and those people talk to each other, and they intermingle their cooperation with each other, and it still does nothing. Right? And it doesn't, because a lot of the approaches in the traditional stuff is very surface level. It's very surface level, and they don't have the tools or the real way of working with clients that actually gets them to what the real issues are. Okay, now I want to be clear, it doesn't mean that it's a root cause. Okay, it's a very a lot of hypnotherapists especially use the idea of root cause, but the truth is it's like a tree, and there's a lot of roots in a tree, and some roots are stronger than others, and some hold on tighter than others. And so it's not really just one root. It's usually 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 roots that are all just you know laid out underneath conscious awareness, and they're just sort of branching into different neural pathways that are combining associations together and getting stuck with emotion. Right? Emotion is like the glue. Emotion is the glue that sort of sticks all of these associations from your life together. Right? And so that's why I talk really heavily about this being an emotional problem. It's not a logical problem. Right? Logically, we don't want to waste our paychecks and break promises to ourselves and others and all these things. We don't want to do that logically. you know it's not like we're logically saying, um we're not saying, oh, it's logical that if I just go play 10 more times or one time I'm going to win. We don't do that. It's not about that. It's how am I going to feel when I win? How am I going to feel when I go? How am I going to feel when I can't stop, or I try to stop and I fail or whatever. So it's the feeling. It's emotional, and it could have absolutely nothing to do with gambling, right? The shame and guilt cycle. Yes, it keeps you sort of stuck there, but it could absolutely have nothing to do with being ashamed of losing that paycheck, or feeling guilty that you did something that you promised you wouldn't, or losing family, losing the house, right? It could have nothing to do with that. That would all add the emotional components into the stickiness of the problem, but it wouldn't actually be the problem, right? So, because in this case, it could have been, a dog that died 20 years ago, right? So, I hope this helps. This is just me going over, hopefully, some understanding of how real therapy actually works and helps a client get out of gambling addiction faster than traditional approaches. It doesn't have to be slow. I think I read that the standard time frame is anywhere between 3 months and a year for a gambling addict to really see a change or a difference in themselves. And it doesn't have to be that long, right? It could actually be very fast. It could, that this person was one session. Now, it doesn't always happen. I want to be very clear. It doesn't always happen in one session, right? Uh, but I've had several sessions where it's just one session. Right? It can very definitely happen in one session. But it doesn't have to, and it could be two, and it could be four, and it could be 10, right? So I want to be very clear about that. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own reasons for doing it subconsciously. Everybody's subconscious mind is doing it for a reason. Okay, you're not addicted to gambling necessarily because you love gambling, right? That's not actually why you're addicted. You're addicted because you love the freedom that you feel when you gamble. That would be more accurate. But it's not that you love the gambling itself. the situation or the experience. It's just the feeling that you like, right? Same with the running away from the pain, right? It's not the situation or the experience that you have such a problem with. It's the feeling that you don't like that surrounds that problem, right? And so that feeling is the glue that sticks everything together. And until that glue dissipates, until the glue gets unsticky, until the glue falls off, all of those associations from me losing my paycheck and all the promises I've made and blah 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 and all my past stuff that I haven't dealt with yet, all of that just gets stuck together. And so we really have to find what is actually going on, right? What's the real problem here, guys? And it's going to be different for everyone. Every client I've ever seen, whether it was for the gambling, for fears or phobias or trauma or anything, doesn't really matter what it is. I've never helped I've never helped two people the same way, right? It doesn't work that way. Everybody has their own reasons and their own justifications and their own emotions for doing what they do, right? Their own motivations for doing what they do. And I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. You know, there's a there's a lot of misinformation out there, discipline and willpower over motivation and things like that. But the truth is, guys, motivation isn't just a feeling. Yes, there's a feeling behind certain things, but if your belief and your identity and your habit and uh, your reasons why are all aligned, I guarantee you there's emotion there, right? So it doesn't have to just be a feeling. It's not like you have to have this motivation, this feeling to quit gambling. In fact, I would say that that'd be far more conscious, right? Be far more willpower and discipline to be like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I am going to quit forever, right? And you can do it, and it can work, and it can be there for a time. But motivation is your reason why. It's your identity. It's your belief, right? It's your emotion around the thing, but also how you feel about what you believe and what you identify as, and things like that. So there's a lot of components that need to shift from the subconscious level, not just the conscious level. It's not about logic and reasoning. Logic and reasoning, it fails in a lot of ways, because you could just take anybody who has anxiety, right? Let's just take flying anxiety. You know, you could hear somebody who has flying anxiety, they'll look over the manifest, they'll they'll make sure uh you know they know all the stats of the plane and the numbers, and they'll be like, okay, well, if three engines go down, that's okay because we only need one to land safely. Or you know the millions and millions and millions of flights every year, very few actually have an emergency landing, and even less still actually crash, and even less still actually have deaths, right? Safest mode of transportation. You can look at all the numbers, but none of that matters. None of the numbers actually matter because it's an emotional issue. It's an emotional problem, not a logical one. And so the moment that they even start to think about a trip, packing their bags, they automatically already have fear and anxiety and what if this and what if that, and what if the plane does this and what if the plane does that, what if the pilot does this and what if the pilot does that, and have all these distorted thoughts around what could happen, right? And that's the same with any problem. There's going to be all these distorted, generalized, deleted thoughts and ideas around actual events, right? Around the plane or around the gambling or whatever. And the person does that to try and fix their problem, right, with logic, and it just doesn't work because it's not logical. It's emotional. So hopefully this helps. This is just me riffing here about different things to understand of how we're actually helping clients get to a place of recovery from their gambling addiction. And then after we get the the addiction side taken care of, the recovery side becomes so much easier, right? When you no longer have the urges, and when the urges are not overpowering or overwhelming you anymore, now you have room to grow your life again, to get out there and rebuild your self-trust and rebuild your self-confidence and rebuild your promises that you've made to people, and rebuild your trust within them, and rebuild your life so that it doesn't feel boring or mundane anymore, right? Because what happens, and I've talked about this in other videos, what happens is, you have all this high dopamine when you go gamble because it's fun, it's exciting, there's drinks, you're winning money, there's beautiful people all around, the environment is fun, right? So you have a lot of dopamine when you're there. Uh, and then life itself, the dopamine down here, right? So you have a high level of dopamine when you go gamble and a low level of dopamine in everyday life. And so after 6 months of realizing that you don't have your life the way you want it, what happens is we relapse and we go back to the gambling because that's where the dopamine is, right? And so hopefully these videos will help you guys understand gambling addiction a little bit better, become aware of it a little bit more, explore it a little bit deeper, understand that it's not just conscious logical fluff. Okay, you can use discipline and willpower, and you need it, and you need a desire, and you need to want to change. Until you want to change, you're not going to, right? But you do need that. So I'm not knocking discipline or willpower. I'm just saying, you know, a lot of people have a misconception of what motivation actually is. They think it's just a feeling. It's not just a feeling. It is a feeling, but it doesn't just come from a feeling of wanting to quit gambling, right? It comes from how you believe you are with gambling, how you identify as a gambler, um, the learned experiences you've had in the past, things like that. Like motivation is so many different components. Your reason why, it's all these things. And yes, there's emotion, but there's emotion attached to every individual component. The way you feel about how you believe about gambling, the way you feel about your identity as a gambler, the way you feel about your learned experiences from gambling, about how you feel about your uh, whatever. There's so many about your reasons, right? Another example, how you feel about your reasons and your whys, right? So there's different components that actually create motivation to do anything, and it's not just how you feel. All right, I want to be clear about that. So if this was helpful, subscribe, follow, like, heart, comment. Do my best to reach out to you guys on the comments and see if I can be of assistance there if needed. If you or anyone else is a problem gambler and you're ready to quit and you're ready to stop chasing losses and you're ready to actually heal and you're ready to actually move forward, message me, DM me. This goes on to all of my socials. So if you find me on TikTok or YouTube or Facebook or wherever, just DM me, message me. Let's set up a consultation. You can also go to www.gamblingonfreedom.com. I'd be happy to talk to you guys and help you actually get your life back together sooner rather than later. All right, guys, that's it for now. Take care, everybody.